What is up, guys? It's your boy Brick VR. Welcome to the show. Hey, behind me is my website, Brick VR Crypto. Check it out at the end of this video. So, guys, we're going to come to this video. Brian Brooks did an interview about DeFi, state licenses, crypto. He is a OCC for the Federal Agency Banking with Minutia. And he used to work for Coinbase. He was like a chief officer. So let's go down to the interview and let's get right into it.
I'm really interested in knowing how you want to, move forward with the charter that, I think you first mentioned at Consensus last month. How do you plan to get it off the ground? And then what kind of opposition do you expect to see either from, maybe state level regulators or other entities that are not on board yet?
So here's the way I think about that. So remember what I said a minute ago about the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln. At that time, the idea was banks were creatures of the states, and every individual state chartered its own banks. And Lincoln said that makes no sense. We need to be a unified, strong national economy in order to win this war and ultimately to compete on the global stage as a nation. I come to this with that exact Lincolnian insight, right? It's not mine, but I share it. And that is national platforms are bigger, more stable, more competitive for scale businesses. And so my thinking is on the charter issue is that there are certain kinds of companies that are engaged in inherently borderless activities. Payments are an example, crypto is an example, and there are other examples out there as well. And if that's the case, and if those are scale businesses, then my question is, doesn't Lincoln's insight apply to them the same way it applies to traditional depository institutions? If they're engaged in a financial business and they're doing it across state lines, wouldn't it be important for my agency to create a national license that allows them to do that business on a national basis, subject to the same kinds of oversight and supervision that traditional banks are subject to? That's kind of the thinking. Now, in terms of our authority and who's going to support this and who's going to initially oppose it, like with any change, there are always early adopters and late adopters. So I think we know that, and we know that there will be people who are skeptical and critical in the early days, and we're open to that feedback. But here's where the authority comes from. Let me just start with that. The authority comes from the idea that the controller of the currency, currently me, gets to issue bank charters. That's a power that's vested in this office that I occupy. And the definition of a bank has for many, many years been quite broad. OCC regulations that go back at least 20 years say that a bank is anything that engages in lending, payments, or deposit taking. Some people have mistakenly assumed that the or in that phrase is an and, right? Because they can't conceive of a bank that doesn't take deposits. And yet we've had banks that are not significant depositories for a long time. We have trust banks, we have credit card banks, and other monoline banks that don't do that. So I begin with the fact that anything that's engaged in one of those three activities under our longstanding regulations can be a bank. So then the question is, who are the companies, what are the activities being conducted that fall into those categories that might benefit from a banking charter?
I'm really curious, how the public feedback you're soliciting will inform, I know the notice said not specifically the charter, but just kind of generally how you see the public feedback informing future regulations or, guidance from your office.
Yeah, well, look, so I think that there are sort of three kinds of things that we're going to get from this ANPR that we just put out. One of them, if you want to start on the charter front, which is only one of the three things, one thing I expect we'll get feedback on what a charter would need to do to be valuable to people. What I don't want is to waste a lot of talented people's time at the OCC working on an initiative and then discover that it doesn't solve the problem. So for example, if I'm a payments company thinking I'd like to have a national charter, but it will only be valuable if the charter will give me access to the Federal Reserve's payment rails, then I need to know that. And I need to do the outreach with the Fed to find out whether that's possible and under what conditions, and we need to partner with them. On the other hand, if they don't care, then I'll get that feedback and I can save the time as we put that together. So feedback on what elements are important for these charters to be valuable is I think, important to hear, first of all. The second thing I would say is that, I've said in other circumstances, I want our innovation office to have an evaluation function. I want them to be able to assess the risks and benefits of certain technologies to the banking system so that we can give banks guidance about where we think it's safe and where we think there are concerns. I do believe one reason fintech hasn't grown faster is because banks are nervous about it and the OCC hasn't given them clarity. So I want to help solve that. And so I believe we'll get some feedback in response to the ANPR about what's going on and how banks are interacting with it, and what the risk factors are that have been observed. And we'll probably get that from both tech companies and banks. And then finally, specifically on the crypto point, there's the issue of a payments charter, which crypto companies might be interested in. But wholly apart from the chartering issue, I know from my personal experience, crypto companies have had real trouble getting banking relationships. I think there is a perception at the banks that somehow crypto is a disfavored asset class and you shouldn't even provide like a payroll account or a corporate deposit account for a company that's engaged in crypto. And so what I want to do is make sure that we systematically identify what the impediments are to legitimate companies getting banking relationships, whether it's corporate banking relationships, whether it is custodial services by banks to crypto companies or otherwise. I want to get a full spectrum analysis of what are those friction points so that I can identify with the team which we can solve and which we have risk concerns with. So I don't prejudge any of that. We'll figure that out, but I think it's long past time that we get that feedback so that we can be useful, and long past time we solve some of the clarity problems that crypto companies have had for years.
Kind of circling back a little bit, I am really curious. You were talking about letting tech companies start providing some of the basic services that right now is kind of reserved for national banks. I'm curious, is there any concern that, letting tech companies provide payments and related services, is there any concern that might start, taking, significant market share away from the banks that are currently operating around? And are there other services that you could see, fintech companies providing, such as lending, beyond just the basic idea of payments?
So what I would say is that process has already started in earnest. We have companies that are not small companies that have already for 7, 8, 10 years been cannibalizing banks' revenues in areas like payments, lending, data processing, and other kinds of things. So we're well down that path. I don't think that's news to anybody. My view is, yes, those companies might well be, they're certainly competitors to banks. None of them are yet big enough to challenge the biggest banks, but Stripe has a $30x billion valuation. That's not a small company in the world. And PayPal and Square and other companies like that are significant players. So my point is not, hey, let's let the tech companies do that, and then that will start to be a threat to banking. My thought is, if those companies are doing those services, which historically were done by banks, and those companies are having to cobble together a legal structure to operate on, that is a patchwork of state by state stuff, maybe what makes more sense is to bring those companies into the supervised banking system. The competition threat is already there and they're much more lightly regulated. Maybe the right way is to give them a national platform in exchange for a higher degree of safety and soundness supervision, like the banks that today already have to face. And my other comment on that, I guess, would be, I think that banks have always evolved. The American banking system is one of the shining examples of American strength, I would say. And so they've always been successful at evolving. But I think what some of these fintech companies show is banks today are a little bit like the department stores of 25 years ago. There was a time, if you think about it, when if you needed to buy hardware and, clothing, and you wanted to go out to lunch, you could do all of that at Sears. Nobody shops like that anymore, right? Now what they want to do is they want to go to a boutique for their clothing, they go to a special hardware store for their hardware, and then they go out to lunch somewhere down the street. There's been an unbundling, right, of the way consumer preferences work. And I think what fintech shows is that there's a preference in financial services for the same thing. Customers sometimes don't want all of their services at the same company. And so the right approach probably isn't for banks to somehow force customers to get all the services at the bank. The right approach over time might be to allow the bank charter to accommodate boutiques. Stripe, if you think about it, is a boutique, right? SoFi, boutique. JP Morgan, department store. And so the question is, how do you think about all those things? And so bank partnerships and the shape of consumer preferences, I think, will change over time. Yes, there's competition. The shape of a bank will probably change over time, and we need to be nimble about allowing that to happen, because I think consumers, I guess I put it this way, Nick, my job here is not to protect incumbents, and it's not to preserve, the status quo. I'm not curating a history museum here. The job I have is to make sure that the bank charter is flexible enough to maintain a safe, sound, strong American economy. And the shape of banking has to be flexible to accommodate that.
Broadly, beyond just payments, what other services do you see the OCC kind of, looking into regarding crypto companies? I guess specifically, lending, for example. I know BlockFi has been doing a lot of work. I don't know if they're in your scope, but just along that line.
Well, there are a lot of things I think we need to look at. I'll just give you a few. So, for example, DeFi is in its real infancy. I know it's the cool thing for people in crypto to talk about. None of that's yet scaled, and yet it is the most interesting thing happening in crypto. Is it possible to deliver a full suite of financial services without, by algorithm, without any central ledger keeper or whatever? So thinking about that and the way that that would interact with the banking system, I think that is a big thing. On the lending side, I always tell the story of Figure, which is to me one of the most interesting companies that is using a token. You have a lending company that's doing lots and lots of the loan origination and servicing activity on a blockchain and using not one but two tokens to kind of power that activity. With the result, they say that they're taking a significant percentage of loan origination and servicing costs out, which they can pass on to customers. Look, anybody who's going to cut the price of a mortgage in half is good guys in my book, and we should understand the way that those kinds of crypto-enabled lending activities function. I think that's a cool idea that we need to understand more, for sure. And then you've got a series of things. This is less crypto and more just fintech, but you've got these companies that are basically building APIs that allow lenders, credit card providers, other kinds of people to instantly access consumers' bank information so as to reduce cycle times, right? You don't have to, I don't need you to go get your tax return because I can have immediate visibility into your bank account. I can see your 12-month history of recurring deposits and payments, and I know exactly what your picture is. You're approved. Imagine if I could do that in 10 minutes as opposed to 70 days, which is the typical time it takes to originate a mortgage. Those are the kind of things that I think are important. They really radically change the banking experience. And at the end of the day, by making things cheaper and faster, that brings more people into the system. Which is my ultimate passion here, is to have this system be more inclusive so more people can build wealth. And I think there's real promise there.
Okay, guys. So when he was talking about making sure these banks and these cryptocurrency companies get together, JP Morgan Chase made accounts for Gemini and Coinbase. DeFi, everybody's talking about DeFi. I don't know if you guys are into DeFi. I'm into smart contracts, but I'm totally not into decentralized financing yet, about taking out loans and putting my cryptocurrency up as collateral. I'm not doing that quite yet. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you come to my website, BritVR Crypto. Check out all these free, I'll say it again, free passive income videos for cryptocurrencies. Nobody's giving this information away out for free. So check it out when you can. And all you guys have a good day. And all you guys have a good night. And enjoy the crypto life. Peace.